It's a pleasure to be here with everyone today, and certainly my two friends from Cohn Reznick. Um, Delighted to be here. We're calling this webinar basically getting into full and open, how set-aside companies can truly boost their value and size out big. This is really the valley of death, and it's kind of an existential issue. We definitely want to be talking about that, but being that we're currently in December of 2025, I think I'd like to start off by talking about kind of what happened in 2025 and what do we expect to be happening for M&A in 2026. Um, Christine, would you mind taking the lead on, answering your thoughts about what you think is going to be happening in M&A and the GovCon market in 2026?
Sure. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it. Always enjoy working with Sharon and working with the government contracting community. It's all I do and all I know how to do. Whether you're small, large, or in between, we're all watching so much about what's happening with the federal government and the executive orders and memos that have come out that have really shaped the future. And that's something very different, that we've seen. M&A, did stall with Doge and interest rates, but we have seen the pickup. I'm sure you have, Sharon and Jen. We've both seen a lot of interest and a lot of focus on companies looking at their niche or new service lines. But when you're small, or when you're a subcontractor, or when you're a set aside, that can be difficult because you're trailing on to someone else, trailing on the coattails of your prime. So it's defining what you do and what value you provide. And there's a lot of compliance that comes with that. There's a lot of extra bells and whistles that we see are still required and going to be required in 2026. CMMC is not going to go away. And really, we are the risk. The vendors are the risk to the federal government. So they do have to control cyber attacks, and they do have to control and tell us all what we need to avoid the cyber attacks, even though we know they're still going to happen. We also, in FAR 2.0 changes, we're not seeing a lot of big changes in requirements of business systems, which is accounting, estimating, purchasing. So that's very important that the contracting officer can check off that box. And that's something that a lot of set-asides and small business don't have when they need to move to full and open. And so that's something that we should probably talk about a little bit. And I talk about in the Gauge report. So I think 2026 is going to be quite interesting and maybe a little bit harder, as I mentioned to you, Sharon, in 2020 with compared to 2025. We've had shutdowns before, so government contractors know what a shutdown is and how to work through that, get paid, after the shutdown ends, which they're all, some of them are working on now. But 2026, I think, is going to be interesting just because of the innovation that the government's going to require, the new procurement methods, and kind of the going through GSA to do a lot of the purchasing. And this is going to be very different for government contractors moving forward. So those are some of the things that I see for 2026 that I know we can expand on a little bit as we move on today. So
Jen,
Jen,
what are your
yeah,
thoughts?
Sure. I probably would have a mixed lens. I'm a little bit more optimistic, but I'm not sure if that's a financial diligence M&A bias. So let's just put it out there. 2025 was another interesting year, just because I think I still have the, kind of the hangover of 2020, 21, 22, as if the world was a big party, and not sleeping, although it's a pretty good way not to sleep because business was great and everyone was happy unless you're fully exhausted. So that's the time frame or period of what I'm seeing, such that when I saw 24, 23, 24, I'm like, whoa, is this a big slowdown? And true to form, it did a little bit. In 2025, I was hoping for a rebound. Actually, I thought, like, a couple of 2 years of a hold and measured M&A would probably be different. To my disappointment, on the first 6 months of this year, it was a little bit slow. And I can speak for both, not just government contracting, A&D, and all other industries, or M&A in general. And I'm speaking for my personal experience. At the same time, professionals in the field, and of course the rest of the partners in our firm at Cohn Reznick in transaction advisory. The next 6 months of the year became a ton more promising. We are now very busy across industries. I would like to mention, though, that observed in terms of government contracting. So DOGE did have an impact. There were companies that were preparing to sell, whether regardless of their size, and then all of a sudden there were contracts that were impacted by it. Second, although there were potential sellers that were preparing, got a little bit discouraged and wanted to do a wait and see, because even if they did not lose tons of their contracts, or would lose tons of their contracts, the valuation probably was impacted by it, because of what's going on and the uncertainties. It's kind of, you're impacted even if you're not directly impacted, because just as what everyone is thinking. But then again, there's a ton of promise. And why am I still optimistic is because of a few things. One, I think the government contractors learned what the diversification is. Hedging, right? Not just concentrate on one particular customer, one particular client. And it's something that, not just a typical commercial private businesses would always consider, because customer concentration is a big deal. Now, working with the federal government, you gotta understand and see how to diversify products, services, and clients as well. So that was kind of a rude but great awakening. So that's a promising thing that I think that people will apply next year. Second, the commercial application and the federal application of software now, I think, has more than ever have become transferable. Back in the day, they were like, no, Jen, we could never use this application because it's only federal and commercial. That's not the case. And the government being run more like a business, or a thought process that way, is like, what's the available service, product, technology out there that they can procure in order to pursue their end game. So I believe that there will be more participation. Companies are more aware of what they can do, and probably there would be, although there are compliance items that Christine mentioned, I think there will be more companies who would be able to participate in M&A activity as a result of all of those factors.
Excellent. Appreciate that. Let me just say, you guys were more positive about 2025 than I am. 2025 is the year that crashed expectations. The expectation used to be that if you had a prime contract from the government, you could expect all those option years to be exercised, that it was kind of locked in. What we learned is that's not true anymore. And that's not something that's going to end in 25. I think that's going to carry forward into future years, even if we go back to having a base contract and option years, and it'll be 3, 4, 5 years before we can see whether or not there's a consistency in the government exercising all those options. But there's now a question raised that wasn't raised before, and I don't think that's going to go away. Jen, you also mentioned something that is, I think, incredibly important, which is the diversification issue. I've got to tell you that for years, we've been telling our clients customer intimacy. Got to understand your client. You got to know what they want. You got to know what their problems are. You have to be able to anticipate. You have to be able to solve their problems. Well, customer intimacy and diversification for a company that has less than $30 million in revenue is truly a challenge. One of the things that I think is just true about companies in GovCon is that they're going to have some level of certainly customer concentration, absolutely, and hopefully less contract concentration. But I think that's going to be a significant factor, and you've got to be thinking about where are you concentrated. It feels to me like we've been leaning towards going towards the Department of War and the IC for a while. I think that that is absolutely going to be true in 2026 as well. So I started off with 2025 saying it was going to be a great year for M&A. The SBA had just come out with their small business rule that was going to cause so many people to sell. Then, of course, Doge, and then, of course, the tumult and the rewriting of the bar. I'm now humble enough to say, I don't know what's going to happen. But I know that it's going to be interesting, and I do think it's going to be different in 26 than it was in 24. Okay, so let me get to the topic of this top, which is getting into full and open. Clearly, one of the existential issues facing smaller GovCon companies. Basically, let's say that you've got a NICS code that puts you at 34.5 million on a 5-year average, and now you're looking at your 5-year average is 25 million. So you see that it's coming, and the question becomes, what are you going to do about this? I kind of want to lay out the basic 4 options here as a strategic. And then Christine, I'm going to ask you to comment on those if you wouldn't mind.
Okay.
The first is, hey, listen, you're $25 million. Maybe you should be thinking about going into full and open. Now, the truth is, you probably should have been thinking about that when you were 20 million or 18 million, because it's not something that happens immediately. One of the reasons is all the compliance issues necessary on full and open that small business may have a little bit less of a heavy lift. So I think that we need to deal with that. So first, basically going into organic growth with full and open. Why should you bother? Well, the reason to bother is that if you're in the set aside world, we're going to look at your net income. We're going to turn that into EBITDA. We're going to go into an adjusted EBITDA, and we could talk about that at some time. And then we're going to multiply that by a multiplier. If that multiplier is in the set aside world, it's going to be somewhere between 3 and 6. So if you've got 3 million in EBITDA and I give you a 3 times multiple, it's now $9 million value company. If it's 6, it's 18. So clearly getting that multiplier different makes a big difference. If you're in the full and open market, you're pretty much going to be starting at a 5 or a 6, and you can go up to 12 or 14, or depending upon what you're doing. So the value of the same amount of revenue and the profit from it is materially different if you're open versus not. So that's kind of the reason to get into it. Now, a lot of people don't want to go into full and open. So one of the options there is to sell. Basically say, hey, listen, I brought my company to where I'm still in the set aside market, but I don't want to go into full and open. I'm going to sell. Please understand that you're going to get a lower multiple if you're close to sizing out. Basically, when you're sizing out, there's risk involved in getting into the full and open market. And here's the mantra: risk to the buyer is lower price to the seller. If the seller didn't want to do this in the first place, they didn't want to do it for a reason, because it's hard and it's risky. Another option is you can basically size out big. Say, we're going to size out and we're going to buy somebody else. And then the last, and what I see a lot, are companies just kind of saying, I'm not going to make a decision. I'm just going to continue to run my company so it stays under these NICS code size limits. Obviously, if you've got a size limit based upon employee numbers, God bless you, that's fantastic. Almost nobody sizes out on those, but it's the revenue numbers, which is what most NICS codes are based on. So basically 4 options. You can get into the full and open market, you can sell, you can acquire another company, or you can keep your company going just under the threshold. Christine, why do you think somebody should think about getting into full and open? What are the consequences of doing so?
So I love the example that you gave. I think people listening that might open a light bulb up for some, because I don't think that owners understand that, because they hear a multiple of 10 or 12, and regardless if they're a small business set aside, they don't realize there's a discount on that, like you mentioned, or such a lesser multiple. And so I really think they need to be educated about that, and then figure out, do they have the management team behind them to help them if it's going to be an acquisition to help you move up, which I think is a great idea. And I hear probably 25% of my clients right now saying that's what I'm going to do. There are the clients who, what you just said, that they continue on at the level where they're at. They operate at the 20, 25 million. They operate at that for years and years. It's kind of like your body and your weight of your body. Your brain knows how much your body should weigh, and you stay at that weight. And that's kind of where you see a lot of government contractors. I mean, I could show you financial statements of clients that I have where if they're 50 million, they stay at 50 million for years and years and years. Or 10 million. It really depends on the, the management of the owners, the support that they hire and those management teams, because that's where it's going to be important if you want to go to that full and open and you want to grow. We see companies that don't appreciate all of the compliance measures that you have to go. So I think it's worth a discussion to really sit down and figure out with that business owner. Most of these are a couple owners. It's run as an LLC or an S corporation. It is their life. These companies are their life. These small businesses, mostly you meet all of them and they're, owned no more than 4 or 5 people. Or the other option is to take on, a private equity like minority ownership, which you
Well, let me
you
let me challenge you on that for a
yeah,
second. We're talking about a small business that's $20 million in revenue. They might be working at 3 or 4 different agencies.
right.
Most PE is not going to be interested in doing an investment in that small business. PE is largely looking for companies that have some kind of game-changing technology or
Mhm.
processes and that are either already in the full and open or have shown that they can get into the full and open. So I'm interrupting you simply because there's too many companies that turn to me and say, well, we're a $20 million company. All of our work is small business or women owned or whatever. I'll just get a PE investment. To which I
Mhm.
say, good luck. That's
Yeah.
highly unlikely to happen in most circumstances. What do you think, Christine?
Totally agree, except, you do see some where they buy several and do a roll up, of that group of companies. But it's certainly, you have to have some special innovation, AI software that you've built. I mean, today, probably like what Jen was talking about in the 21, 22, 23. I mean, it was rampant of, purchasing and rolling up. Like you said, it was a feeding frenzy. So I really do think there's that inflection point of how much time are you going to spend on the business, building it to be able to move to full and open, and getting that right management team behind you, the right accounting systems, the right advisors, the right legal, and then also if you are going to sell, what are you going to do as the owner? I think that's also a big key point. Do you want to continue to work or not? So it's difficult. I mean, I think that this is a really difficult inflection point that the owners have to sit down and think about. And it's going to take usually. I mean, I see companies where it takes about a year and a half to 3 years, and building that backlog to go along with it. You can't just build the back office. You also have to work really hard, at winning and building that backlog to be able to move to full and open.
So, Jen, let me ask you, when you're doing financial due diligence, let's say that you're on the buy side and you're looking at a company that's say 25, $35 million in revenue, mostly small business, maybe they have no full and open work. Or maybe they have just a little bit, 10% or so. What are you looking for in your due diligence to see whether or not your client, the buyer, is making a smart move in acquiring this target?
All right, let's start with if financial due diligence happens and you're talking of a buy side situation. My client is trying to buy this company. So that means they have some investment thesis sharing in their head, right, of how much this company is, being aware of the risks, right? Meaning you have a tiny, full and open. That's obviously an opportunity because you pretty much weed out everyone if you're purely small business, set aside, woman owned, veteran owned, right? Because that limits the pool of people who could buy your company. So let's say in this particular instance, so what we would normally do with financial due diligence is there will be standard things that would have to happen, and then there are idiosyncratic or very peculiar or unique in a government situation, and then in a small business situation. So EBITDA would be the end all and be all overall, but a component of that EBITDA is going to matter. What does that mean? So EBITDA, you have a multiple, okay, the thesis will be tested. What will primarily happen will be there will be a digging of your revenue and gross margin by customer, by project. Because what are the first things that you have to understand? What type of contracts do I have? You know, are they fixed price? Are they T&M? Are they cost plus? Second, which ones are full and open? Which ones are...
Let me interrupt you for a second because you said something that's very important. Almost all buyers want to be able to see the profitability of the target by contract.
Mm-hmm.
And we find that that is something that a lot of small business owners don't do. If in fact you're thinking about going to market, whether now or in 3 years from now or whenever it might be, start structuring your financials so that you can check the profitability by contract, because trying to reverse engineer that when Jen says, okay, give me that information, and you say, what do you want from me? Know that that's something that's coming. So I apologize for interrupting you, Jen, but I really wanted to emphasize that point.
Please emphasize it all day, because just to underscore, I have experienced clients being very ready and know the number that they're going to sell. And the moment we slice and dice the numbers, they're just not going to be prepared. Buyers will not be just looking at an overall number. They will dig deep. We will, in order to make sure that these big number is supported by little numbers that still supports the overall investment thesis. What does that mean? You're making margins of EBITDA margin of 15%. All right, where is this 15% coming from? And we're going to look at the customer, the project at a job order level, right? And then so you have to be able to gather that information to prove that you really are the value that you are purporting to be.
Let me give you a specific example about that. We had a client that had a tremendous amount of contract diversification, 15, 20 different contracts. Fantastic. We then looked at it by gross margin on each contract, and we found that there were 4 contracts that were extraordinarily profitable. And the rest of them were kind of 2%, 4%, whatever. And the backlog was a lot tied to the contracts that had low margins. Well, that changed the entire outlook and the viability of that company for sale. So really understanding where the value is coming from, it makes a huge difference. If people aren't going to do exactly what you said, dig down deep and understand where the value is coming from, not simply looking at it as an overall top. Christina, were you looking to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add into that that's so true. And that's where, when you are thinking about going to full and open, that you have to take a hard look at your contracts and decide that there are some of them you should not keep. You shouldn't have. It's going to pull you down. You're focusing too much on one where the margin is not there, and it's on another. And it's interesting that the backlog was on those with the lower margin that you just mentioned. That's very unusual. Usually, yeah.
Yeah, Jen, going back to you. Okay, so going into a case by case and looking at the kind of contracts that they have. Go on.
Yes. So secondly is that I always tell everyone or clients, especially sellers, potential sellers, right, that you are proving out your business investment thesis with your historical, but that has to be bridged to the future. You're not being bought for your past. You're being bought for your potential for the future, because everyone is thinking, or the potential buyer is thinking, that they will have even a better exit. Look, we buy low, we sell high. That's in a stock, that's in a business, that's pretty much in almost everything. So what does that mean? Your historical information should harmonize, I call it that, because that's how we think about it. Your historical financial due diligence should harmonize with your sim, your teasers and all that. So we look at the history at a project level and look at what the future will be. What's going to happen next year? What's your concept? How would this project perform and expect to perform in the backlog situation, your waterfall, with the future of fiscal 26, fiscal 27 at least. And it would also go to the revenue and profitability, because that will be asked. And sometimes, for some weird reason, some contracts change. You know, you may be cost plus, then it will become fixed price, will become T&M, or the other way around, depending upon the dynamics as well. Second thing that probably you would also have to make sure is your balance sheet. You have to make sure that, you know, the balance sheet and the income statement. I love accounting because those things talk to each other. You can't miss anything because you would know something is off. So that is also something that they need to prepare, because the buyer will be looking at it and then would be thinking about how much net working capital do I need to run this business. And as you know, Sharon, net working capital and indebtedness, two important big factors that no one would like to think about until it's there, that could have a dollar for dollar impact on your purchase price. So you thought you're going to get $50 million, think again, because it could be a different number via the analysis. So run your business well, efficiently, and not just be focused on the income statement, all the items that I'm talking about, and of course your overheads, right? The fixed part, the fixed expenses of your business, but also your net working capital. Are you efficient with your receivable, your payables? Are you accruing? Are you applying GAAP, etc.?
Terrific. Christine, I'd like to turn to you and say, let's say that we're talking about a GovCon company, again, $25, $30 million, and they're saying they want to start going into the full and open market. What kinds of preparation do they need? Obviously, it's going to be a different business development process, okay, and they're going to be working in a different market. But from a back office accounting, finance perspective, what are they doing?
So it's surprising that we have some of these that are selling that don't know the profit margin on their contracts, because we have so many good systems out there. So, of course, number one, you've got to set up a good system that's going to be able to track this for you. The other thing that companies don't really realize is what are their indirect rates and what are the adjustments to their indirect rates. We work with Jen a lot, where when she's determining those profit margins and the future, we can actually adjust the indirect rates based on what the quality of earnings adjustments were. And that's really important to the seller, and the buyer to kind of understand that. So getting good policies within your accounting, your purchasing, your estimating, and they don't have to be, extreme. Let's start out small. When you are a small business, we've got to take steps. And it's really about prioritizing what policies are the most important that you need. What is your customer asking you about? What do you think those future contracts are going to be requiring that you hear about? Government contractors actually kind of swarm together. They go to events together. They go to discussions, CEO discussions. So I really think, finding out what your customer, like Air Force, sometimes wants a little something different on their contracts versus FAA versus.
If I could interrupt for a second, that's exactly the point that I was making with Jen. On one hand, hey, listen, I'm a graduate of the University of Chicago. It was pounded into me, diversification and all else. On the
Right.
other hand, you can't really know what this particular office at the Air Force wants unless you have customer intimacy. And that, I think, is the push-pull tension that smaller GovCon companies face on a daily basis.
Right. Right. Yes. And it's gotten more confusing because your customer that you thought was going to be there forever retired. or or you had such a great relationship with that person, you knew that the next option year was going to be renewed. You can't rely on those morals anymore. You really have to understand the customer as a whole, not just one person. And I think we've all learned that, through so much change with lots of different industries. But the accounting system, back to your question, the accounting system, the policies, who are you banking with? And really who are you, make sure you understand your accounting, like Jen was talking about, because a lot of companies um need to understand that they need to be on the accrual basis for their financials, and they don't run them that way, and then that's a big surprise.
That is a huge issue. Can you bring out anything from the Gauge report, the annual report that you do, that kind of a case study that might emulate the key data that might be needed in this kind of circumstance?
Yeah, so I would point people to several areas in the Gauge. So the Gauge is a report that we do where government contractors answer questions every year, and we usually have like somewhere over 1,000 contributors. And we break that up into 5 chapters, and I really appreciate Sharon mentioning it to it, because we do this to be proactive and give back to the community so that you know what benchmarks you need to be at. So there's a couple areas in the Gauge that I would focus on. Number one, we talk about wrap rates and efficiency with those indirect rates, like I've mentioned. Number two, we talk about your full-time equivalent within functional areas of your company. This is a really good, it's in the utilization section, and it'll help you because we provide information by revenue size. So you could look, how many people should I have in HR? How many people should I have in accounting? It's just a benchmark. It might not be exactly right for you, but at least it's something, where you can start with. We also talk about how many companies need different types of audits and business systems. And so you can look in there at how many times companies have seen in a solicitation, how much they've seen the accounting system required. And we also talk about days sales outstanding, and days that your payables stay outstanding. So I think there's a lot of good things in there. What I see that owners do is kind of rip it apart and give it to different people within their company and say, hey, let's dive into this area a little bit more. Or let's understand, that next year we'll be able to build our pro forma of our indirect rates and use those to bid on our contracts. And then we always have a theme in the Gauge as well. So to kind of help people, like last year, it was project management.
Well, the Gauge report is an excellent tool, and I really appreciate you raising that. I want to go to one of the questions that was asked, which
Okay.
is, I think, incredibly important. Sellers often have expectations. Hey, listen, I'm an M&A advisor, so I talk to sellers all the time, and they'll say to me, I need to get a 5.75 multiple. And what that means to me is that their golfing buddy just got a 5.5. And they think that their company is better than their. Now, the other guy's company could have been in HVAC, it could have been in software. Who the heck knows? But, there's a kind of competitiveness element to it. Alternatively, sometimes people will come to me and say, I need to sell my company so that after taxes, I have 10 million, 15 million, 30 million, whatever the number might be. And that to me indicates that they've spoken with their financial advisor, who has basically said, this is what it is you need to basically not worry about money again in the future. Both of those numbers are interesting to know, but completely irrelevant to the value of your company. What you need your company to be versus what it is are not necessarily the same things. So here's where buyers really make a difference. Um, Buyers, as Jen was saying, in 2020, 21, 22, you had a company that was alive. You'd paid your, annual um, ticket to the state in which you're located, and there was a buyer who was interested in you. 23, that changed. 24, that changed a lot. 25, even more so. I think that what you do is going to be incredibly important. If you're in some way working on the, Golden Dome, then people are going to be running to you. If you're working on janitorial work at A, it's going to be a far more challenging situation. In addition, there have been a change in the rules. The SBA put out a new rule in December of 24 that went into effect in January of 25, and it further goes into effect in January of 26. And while the rule is not as big as we all initially thought when our hair was on fire, what we've learned is that the SBA is saying if you have a task order and you've got options on that task order, we're going to let the buyer exercise those. But if you have a multiple award vehicle, don't think that when you sell to somebody who doesn't have that same set aside, that they're going to be able to use that multiple award vehicle. And that could be a game changer for companies that are doing cutting edge type of work, but are still in the incipient stage and have a vehicle that before a buyer would buy to get access to that vehicle, probably not going to be true going forward. So I really think it's important that we look at what are the current rules to figure out where the value to buyers are going to be. Going to Jen's point for a moment, clearly the core is a government contracting company is a combination of its contracts. It's just a portfolio of those contracts. Understanding which ones are providing great value, which ones less so, incredibly important. And that's where so much work needs to be done before you go to market. These are questions that are going to be asked by the buyer, and you darn well better know the answers. Otherwise, you look a little bit foolish. It's really important for sellers to understand where their value is coming from. And that value is coming from clearly the historic. Buyers pay for what has happened in the past, but they buy because what do they think is going to happen in the future. So sellers need to be focusing on both of those. Let's say that you had a great year in 24 and 25, but the period of performance for that your 40% contract is going away. Well, that buyer is going to be extremely nervous. They're going to be focusing on the future, but they're going to pay you for the past. So really understanding the importance of having a lot of backlog makes a big difference to buyers. Understanding good records, no, somebody being made. Chris, thoughts about what you said?
She broke up a little bit for me. Did she break up?
Do you have any thoughts about what I was just saying?
Oh, yeah, you broke up.
Yes, I do, but I haven't moved on, Sharon, from the question on preparation, right? So
please.
She has more. She has more.
I haven't moved on. I'm hung up. It's because of what Christine said about preparation. I think the other things that need to be considered from ERPs and all are two important things that I have seen that companies don't really invest in or do not think much of. One would be the experience, competence, and quality of your accounting team. So normally I would be put in a situation where they would be telling me that, my accountant said I am accrual basis. And then I have to give them the rude awakening, like, you are not accrual. And that's kind of a tough situation to be in, because obviously I respect fellow colleagues in the accounting profession, but if it's not right, it is not right. It's simply that way, because everyone can see through that. And if I am preparing and helping the seller. So you have to think about strategically the type of lead accountant, your quarterback on the accounting realm of things, what the qualifications of that person that is needed. Obviously we value loyalty. However, maybe your current person may not be the one that could best position you, for a potential transaction, right? So you want to make sure that you're prepared there. And secondly is the outside advisors. So M&A is a very complex thing to navigate. You know, as I've said, you could be working with the best and brightest lawyer in corporate law or estate law or whatever, right? Litigation. And I tell my clients, no, an M&A lawyer is necessary. And if you're doing GovCon or highly regulated compliance, a GovCon M&A lawyer would be ideal. So same goes for the financial due diligence advisor, for your accounting advisors, for your ERP advisors, because you want to be strategic about that. You want to be ready. And you could I have a right. I made an article out there. It's called "Fix It Now or Pay Later." And Sharon, if you know musicians are inspired about romance and great things that happen to them, that particular write-up that I did was triggered by frustration. I said, why? Why are they not preparing? We don't want to waste your money. I certainly don't. And this is not the best use of our time. So please talk to people, educate yourself. Like Sharon was saying, not just your golf buddies, not just your friends in the resort or whatsoever. Talk to as many, right? Be generous in terms of informing yourself of what's out there, to be ready as to your value, the people that you need to be with, the things that you need to consider.
I think people need to go into it, be ready, but have an open mind. Listen to the people who have been doing this professionally for a while. And I want to emphasize a point that you made, Jen. Whatever professional that you hire, and you definitely need, M&A is a team sport. You need to have somebody who knows substantively what they're doing, financial due diligence, or, you know, the legal issues, et cetera, et cetera. You know, and then two, you need to have somebody who understands GovCon. GovCon is different. If somebody comes to you and says, oh, well, we've worked in this area and that area, so we can just do GovCon as well, the answer is no. GovCon is different, and you really want to have people who know what they're talking about in that industry. I frequently, as I think you were mentioning, basically say you cannot have the person that you love and did your trust and estates to do your M&A. Totally different skill set. You know, you wouldn't go to a cardiologist for your skin issue, and you wouldn't go to a dermatologist if you've got a heart problem. You've got to go to the right kind of specialist in those fields. So
And
let's talk.
Sharon,
Yep,
also to say that this was your baby, and you know it's so important to you. So spend the right amount of money and the right people to help you with it. Because there's so many people that get the phone call to sell, and you're so right. I mean, that wasn't the topic of this discussion, but you see it happen a lot where folks don't get the right service providers to help them out. And you definitely need the folks that understand GovCon. You're so correct.
I want to go back to kind of the core message of the podcast of this webinar, which is, hey, the existential angst associated with what to do about going into full and open. So to quickly summarize, the reason to go into full and open is that your company will be of greater value. You don't need to be 100% full and open in order to get that value. Obviously, if you are, you're probably going to do better than your 10 or 20%. But if you're 10 or 20%, you've basically proven that your company can win in the full and open market. And that's incredibly important. So it's not like here are the numbers for set aside companies and you can't possibly do any better than that. And here are the numbers for full and open. It is a continuum based upon whether or not you have some level of full and open work. One thing I do want the audience to take away, however, is don't think that you can run your company under the NICS code size out and then sell it as though it was already in the full and open, or that it would be so easy for somebody else to do that. It is true that buyers are interested in the future, and getting it into the full and open market matters a lot. But that buyer is not going to pay the seller for that. That is a responsibility the buyer is taking on, and they're going to get the benefit of it. So sellers can think in advance, what can they do to make that easier for the buyer so that they can capture some of that value? Jen, any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think I wanted to mention the how you grow, how do you get to be full and open? And there are multiple ways there. So you have your organic and inorganic way to go about that. You buy your company, or typically what I see is, if you're big enough or aggressive enough, you do both, right? You could do both. So you should be hiring the right growth officers, business developers, etc., in order for you to get there. Second, I also hear of some of my clients who do minority investment, Sharon, who knows the business very well, and you are a company poising yourself to be there. And so you will have not only the funding from your minority investors, but at the same time, the experience to help you how to get there, navigate there, because more often than not, they are the ones who have already done and experienced going about getting into full and open.
We just received a question that I think is terrific, so I want to read it aloud and then ask all of us to answer this one. The smaller the company, the harder it is to locate good accounting and good bookkeeping assistance. And small business GovCon owners are often held back in small prison because they can't get the help that they need. Can you offer any suggestions on how small, even emerging smalls, can get the guidance they need to grow? Christine, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I love this small prison. Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
good one.
exactly.
Got the Valley of Death. We have the No Man's Land, and we have small prison now. That's a good one. It is difficult. I feel for you. I think what I've seen is more outsourced accounting is being provided, and that is being provided within industry specific. So what I do see some companies do is have their small accounting uh, company, a small person or smaller, or maybe less experienced in accounting, and then have somebody look at the financials on a monthly or quarterly basis and give them tips and tricks and advice so that you're not taking on a heavy load, but you're just working at improving your financials. And really, that's a good way to do it because then that advisor is getting to know your business along the way. So it could take a couple quarters before that company gets an improved financials. But that is one really good way to make that happen, unless you want to outsource your accounting completely.
Which, by the way, is not necessarily a terrible idea.
Hmm.
I government contracting owners that are engineers or they are designers or whatever it might be, they're not accountants. And there are firms that will do outsourced work, depending upon the size of the company and all the rest of that. So there are outsourced providers now in a way that I don't think that there was 10 years ago. I think that there is an increasing emphasis on trying to manage back office expenses by getting outside advisors to do that work on a regular basis and then bring it together on a monthly or quarterly. Jen, what are your thoughts?
I think that's a perfect example because that's where you get the happy medium. So the smaller mom and pop accounting shops probably would have less depth and breadth, but the kind of the mid-size firms would be able to provide you the experience, the library of wealth of experience that they have, that you're not hiring a full CFO. That's probably what you would like to be, your day to day, but a very experienced, outsourced accountant overseeing to make sure that you are being led along the way to prepare yourself to have a more sophisticated level of accounting tracking and all that, because obviously you can't hire a CFO at that stage, right? You are trying to manage your business and your expenses as well, but think strategically, because this is an investment more than an expense in my view, because you will lose a good value of your business if you're not ready or if you're doing it too late. And it would be even more costly, in fact, because you can't re-engineer 3 years of the past. Got to do that sooner, incrementally.
Okay, that sounds great. Um, I think I've responded to the questions at this point. There is one point that I wanted to make, again, going back to that SBA rule that was passed adopted in 24, went into effect in 25, and more so this year. And that is there's one provision in there that's really good for small businesses. And that is somebody who is still in the set aside world acquiring another company that is a small. It used to be that if you had a $25 million company and you bought another $25 million company so that your combined revenue is now 50 and the relevant NICS code was 34.5, you were sized out. That was the end of it. At the last minute, the SBA put a little provision in there saying that if a company is small before the acquisition and buys a company that's small prior to the acquisition, and together they're bigger, they still get to keep all the multiple award contracts that are there. That is a benefit that small businesses can have in doing an acquisition that really is not available to anybody else. So it's really a good thing to understand that if you are, again, I go back to the $25 million company, you're under a $34 million NICS code, don't size out by $500,000. The worst case scenario is that now you're 35 million, you're competing with the big guys, but you don't have any infrastructure, you don't have any bulk with which to do that. What I'm seeing a lot of companies doing is saying, we're going to size out. We want to get to be a $50 million, $100 million company. That's where we want to go. We've done organic growth to get to this part, but now particularly with this small on small provision, we're going to go from 25 to 50 million and still have some of the benefits of being a small business designated company. It's a brand new provision. I don't know how this is going to play out over the next 2 or 3 years, but it is something of value to small businesses, and they have to think about, do they see themselves as a buyer? Do they see themselves as a seller? Or do they see themselves as pursuing organic growth to get into the full and open market as opposed to simply staying under the code, under the NICS code? Jen, any thoughts about that?
I think that's great news that small businesses should take advantage of and consider. I think it would give more opportunities for small businesses to think bigger and maybe reconsider keeping a lifestyle business beyond that. Because we hear the Sharon, like, I just want to stay here and do this, but I think the bottom line that you need to figure out is what type of exit you want to have, and would you like to monetize that exit, and how to maximize such exit.
Okay, and let me jump in there. One of the first things I did in the GovCon market was go to an event where there was an investment banker who stood at the top of the stage and said, if you've got a company with designations, SD, VOSB, and all the rest, it's really not sellable. It's not going to be a material transaction. And I'm sitting there squirming in my seat saying, it is so not true. I mean, if you've built a company that's got, again, $3 million of EBITDA, and we can get you a 4 or a 6 multiple, well, you're talking about 12 to 16 or $18 million. I'm a kid from Long Island. I think more than $10 million is a lot of money. It's nothing to sneeze at. On the other hand, you're not going to get a $50 million exit. And so you've got to think about, you can't run a company as though it's been a lifestyle company. And then when it comes time to selling it, saying, oh, did I say it was a lifestyle company? It's really not. Because one of the differences of the lifestyle versus not is, did they put the compliance issues into effect? Are they doing accrual versus cash accounting? Are they bidding on full and open work? Do they have a breakdown of all their contracts by gross margin? Because a lot of lifestyle companies don't do that, and that's fine. You can sell it for 10, 12, $16 million, whatever it is, and then the next person will come in and do that. But don't think that you can run your company one way for 25 years and then in a 2-year period of time totally change that. Okay, ladies, argue with me. Tell me why you disagree with that.
No, I want to mention, no, I'm in perfect agreement with you. Fix it now or pay later. One thing that I think we haven't mentioned is tax implications, Sharon, triggered by the word lifestyle. Because lifestyle is you do whatever you want with your business, you expense everything, your wife, your kid, your cousin, your whoever, the lawn mowing in your house, etc. You want to pay yourself $100 million of salary every year. All of those, believe it or not, it's not our problem. EBITDA add back. We want to get to the EBITDA, but our client is also doing tax due diligence and they're trying to see the tax implications of all of those. You paying yourself an exorbitantly big amount of money, salary that is not typical for the average, is a trigger, depending upon obviously the tax structure. I'm not the tax expert, I got to say that, but I work obviously with our tax partners side by side, tax due diligence, we're doing that. Those could kill the deal if you don't do that right. So, aside from the financial due diligence, you got to think about the tax implications, how you have conducted yourself in terms of compliance, and understand and gauge what the risks are. Because the buyer will say, I don't want to inherit that. That's your watch. You pay for it.
Let me ask you a question on that one. Gosh knows, as M&A advisors, we've seen everything. We've seen parents being on the payroll, children getting their allowances from the payroll, somebody traveling, where I'm not the IRS, that's not my issue. But did I hear you say, hey, listen, they're running 500,000, $1 million of extra costs through the company? When we're as M&A advisors, that's the magic asterisk. That's where we get from EBITDA to adjusted EBITDA. But what I heard you just say is that, in fact, they were getting some tax benefits associated with that. And when the deal closes, the seller is always responsible for any tax issues associated with anything that happened prior to the closing. Are you seeing buyers looking at a company that runs a lot of expenses through the company and saying, I'm sorry, we think there's a tax liability associated with that and we don't want to touch it?
Well, it's very likely that they will push through with it. However, what as I've said, we talked about indebtedness, we talked about pre-closing taxes, right? That would be all part of a purchase price adjustment. So when I was talking about $100 million, say if that's the number of $50 million, my client would say, well, my tax diligence person is there's 90% risk on your underreport on your understated income taxes as a result of burdening with too much expenses. Check. We don't want to pay that. We'll quantify the amount. Now you're a seller and you'll be thinking like, whoa, do I accept or do I go? So if it's $1 million exposure, you're getting 50, what are you going to do? I'm going to say, okay, 1 million. So your 50 becomes 49 million right there and there, just because you did not think about the potential impact or issues of that. And state compliance is also an issue. Normally, that's something that smaller companies don't really care about, but buyers will be checking every state nexus. Do you have a person here? Did you sell there? And it will quantify all of that liability.
The whole state and local taxes issue is a very big deal. A subject for another day. I want to be very respectful of the audience's time. It's currently 1 o'clock. We have answered some of the questions. If any other questions come in, please let us know. Jennifer, if you wouldn't mind.
Oh, thank you. That was a great discussion. I'd like to thank Christine, Jen, and Sharon for the discussion today, and to everyone who attended. Thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to our panel. Their emails are on the slide that you're seeing right now. We'll leave that on the screen for a little bit, and we hope you have a wonderful day.